Hey, folks, welcome into another edition of Dawg Walk Talk. It is Sunday, March 13th, Selection Sunday. Tom Brady has announced that he's coming back out of retirement, but that's not the news of the day for Georgia fans. I'm Palmer Toms here with Nick De La Torre of Gators Online, and we're talking Georgia basketball as the Bulldogs are hiring Florida head coach Mike White to be the next leader of the men's basketball program. Nick, really appreciate you coming on and joining us such short notice. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. It had been a long time coming for some Gator fans, but I think some of us, at least in the media, are sad to see Mike White go because he was great to us and a great person. So we're sad to see him leave, but Florida fans have been calling for this for a while, and I think the sentiment among Florida fans was, "Thank you, Georgia." And I don't know how often you'll hear a Florida fan say, "Thank you, Georgia." So hopefully it ends up with both parties being happy.
Yeah, it is interesting always when you see a move, whether it's an assistant coach or a coordinator or something along those lines. Very rarely do you see a head coach make a move, within a conference. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's probably even rarer that you see it within a rivalry as fierce as Georgia and Florida and Georgia, as your folks would like to refer to it. But Mike White. Let's get the background on him. Obviously, he's been at Florida for the last 7 seasons and has made the Gators a mainstay in the NCAA tournament. That's status that Georgia fans would absolutely like to get to. What is Georgia getting in Mike White?
First and foremost, Mike White is a family man. Has, I believe, 3 children, maybe more, but he had 3 when he was hired at Florida. And it got to the point where it became really toxic at Florida. And he, being a family man, the reason I brought that up is it got to the point where now that he had been at Florida for 7 years, you've got a 10-year-old who understands the nasty things that people are yelling at your dad during the game. And you're asking mom, why are they saying that about dad? And it got to a point at Florida where the White family wasn't even coming to basketball games anymore. Mike White's a great recruiter. He's gotten great talent to Florida. I believe he has a top 25 recruit signed to Florida this year. Now, obviously, with the transfer portal and those guys aren't on campus yet, will they follow him to Athens? That's something that would be devastating to Florida, considering it's a really good class of 3 guys coming in this year. And you don't know what the recruiting class will look like if he leaves. So a great recruiter. He came to Florida saying that defense and a high-tempo offense would be the DNA. And Florida played, for the most part, really good defense. They were never high-tempo and not like middle-of-the-pack tempo. They were some of the slowest teams in the country, and then the half-court offense wasn't great. I think the biggest knock, and something a lot of us were talking about in the media, was he's a great recruiter, a great program builder, which I think is kind of what Georgia's looking for right now, someone to build a program, but maybe needed, and we called it an offensive coordinator, maybe needed a guy that was more involved in the X's and O's, and Mike might need to hand off some of his responsibilities to that other person. He had to hire 2 new coaches in the offseason, and neither of them were that. So I think right now Florida fans would tell you, great guy, recruited pretty well, terrible game day coach. And I think that's kind of what we thought. They ended up hiring a guy named Travis Pastrana, and he came in, but that was not going to be the guy to be your X's and O's, another great recruiter. So I think it would probably do Mike some good if he found somebody on his staff at Georgia to take some of those game day abilities or game day responsibilities off of his plate.
Yeah, I think when you look at what Georgia is transitioning on from in Tom Crean, it has been lacking that recruiting. As the state of Georgia is so rich in talent. If you look across the league in the SEC, I mean, it seems like Auburn is dominating with a team that's pretty much entirely from the Atlanta area. Walker Kessler is a Georgia legacy. KD Johnson, obviously, moving on from Georgia. So the talent is there. Georgia just has not been able to pull it in, whether that's been evaluation or just, a lack thereof in recruiting. that has been Georgia's biggest struggle. And so I think for Georgia fans to hear that they are bringing in somebody who has a knack for recruiting is certainly going to be refreshing.
Yeah, and Mike's young still. I mean, he came to Florida before his 40th birthday. He's been in Gainesville for 7 years. He's only 45 years old, so he's still young. He enjoys going out and recruiting. You'll see him at tournaments, high school tournaments, UAA tournaments, or UA?
AAU.
AAU. I'm dyslexic, I guess. AAU tournaments. You'll see him there. He demands that his staff does that well. They enjoy the recruiting process. They enjoy watching film and evaluating. And it was never a problem for Mike White to get talent to Florida. It's just when you get that talent, then there's a certain level of expectation. And certainly at Florida, replacing Billy Donovan was not going to be easy for whoever it was. And I think I wrote about Mike today in my story, and he had just received a 2-year extension, which people were angry about, but he was 243 and 128 at Florida, 122 and 69 in conference play. His team's ranked inside the top 20 in all-time SEC winning percentage during his 7-year tenure, and Florida fans have wanted him out for 3 years. So there was a certain level of expectations that Billy Donovan left at Florida. I don't know if they're super attainable. How many teams have won back-to-back championships? And I feel it's almost gotten to the point where Florida's not happy with making the tournament, or not even happy making the tournament and getting to the second weekend. If you're not getting to the Sweet 16, to the Elite Eight regularly, Florida fans are not going to be happy in basketball.
Right. I mean, because if you look at it from 2017 to 2021, obviously there was no tournament in 2020, but Florida made 4 straight NCAA tournaments. They were one of the only team in the SEC to do that, and one of 12 teams nationally. Furthermore, the Gators won a game in each of those appearances, just one of 6 teams in the country to do so. So, I think when you're looking at Georgia, somebody who hasn't been to the NCAA tournament since, I believe, 2008, when the Bulldogs made that magical run in the SEC tournament. I could be wrong on that. I'm making myself seem pretty young here, but not being able to remember some of this Georgia information. But, when it comes to postseason basketball, that's something that Georgia fans have not been used to watching. This Selection Sunday, as we're recording, they haven't really been tuning in, anxiously awaiting where Georgia is going to be landing. That's not the case at Florida. And that hasn't been the case for Mike White-led teams in general, because if you look at his track record, even going back to Louisiana Tech, he was there for 4 seasons. 3 of those years he made the NIT. First year at Florida makes the NIT, and then every year since then up until now made the NCAA tournament. So I think that when you're talking, postseason basketball, a coach that has a track record in the postseason, that's something that Georgia obviously had in Tom Crean. They had a coach that had a track record, and it didn't work out. But I think it's certainly interesting to make a move to somebody that has done it in the conference that Georgia's trying to do it in.
And that team that Mike White took in his first year to the NIT was bad. Like Florida fans, like Billy's national championships and how high Florida competed at that level, they forget about how bad the team was when Billy left. Like Billy missed the tournament his last year and then left, and then Mike came and they went to the NIT. It's like, that wasn't even on Mike. That was a great coaching job to get that group to an NIT. It's interesting to me because I remember almost being starstruck the first time I covered a Florida basketball game, and I go down, at halftime to go to use the bathroom. I'm like, that's Tom Crean. Huh, man. Because at that time, the SEC was still it was a football conference, and Tennessee or Kentucky every year, and then Florida some years would be good. And now you look at the SEC, and they're pouring money into coaches and into recruiting. And the SEC was a ton of fun to watch this year for basketball. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, from our standpoint at Gators Online in Florida, to see where Florida goes from here. I think the last 5 coaches Florida's hired have been under 40 years old. Mike just over that, only halfway to 50. But I think it's a good coach for Georgia. They've gone and tried the established coach with a record. Now you're getting an established coach with a record who's also still young and still has that fire for recruiting. He isn't going to rely on hey, I coached this team in 94. Do you remember them? And it's like, no, the kid you're recruiting was born in 2003. He doesn't remember the team you coached in 94. So I think if Georgia, and maybe I'm off base and your fans can correct me, but I think Georgia's trying to build a program. And I would absolutely, as someone who covered Mike White for 7 years, say Mike White is a coach who is a program builder and who can be that for you guys.
No, absolutely. I absolutely believe that Georgia was going after a program builder here, because if you looked at the names that were, so prominently attached to this job, it was a lot of mid-major guys that had built up programs. But Mike White wasn't necessarily on the radar for them. What I guess, when did it become apparent to you that things may be turning here, with White leaving Florida?
Things turned in most fans' minds. Things turned years ago, and they called him mid-major Mike because of where he came from. Which I already know what they'll call Billy Napier if that doesn't work out. Yeah, mid-major Billy will be coming up. If Florida football can't turn it around. Mike's faced a lot of adversity early on. They had injuries, which players decided to come back, so you were hampered in recruiting, and then the injury kept them still out, and now you're playing a man down. Last year, you build in 2021, you build your entire team around Keontae Johnson, who was the SEC preseason player of the year. He's going to be probably the SEC player of the year, a first-round pick, and 5 games into the season, he collapses with a cardiac incident, and he's out for the year. Not only do you not have plans of how you're going to run your offense anymore, but you just watch your entire team just watch one of their brothers, one of their teammates seemingly die on the court. Luckily Keontae's fine and was able to kind of rejoin the team in a coach capacity, but that's still a traumatic event. So there's been a bunch of different things that have happened, whether it's been injuries or the Keontae situation. This year they lose Jason Jatobo, who's their center, gets hit in the eye and scratches his cornea. And now he's out for the year for the last 6 weeks. So it just seemed to be things that would happen. And it was almost like his tenure in Florida was snake bit. You're following Billy Donovan and then one thing after another, and these things start piling on. And it's kind of like one, how could this ever happen thing piled onto another. And then Florida fans just called those excuses when we're just pointing out reality. But it got to the point this year where I thought to myself, if Mike White went to the Final Four this year, I think there's a large section of the fan base that still wouldn't come back. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, well, what if they won the national championship? And then I started like running through message board posts in my head of thinking, can't believe this group dragged Mike White's body all the way to a national championship. I'm like, yeah, I think it's gotten to the point where he's lost so much of the fan base that it wouldn't come back. And he was actually extended last year, which added 2 years to his contract and bumped up his buyout from Florida's standpoint from $1.25 to $1.5 million for every year remaining.
Which Georgia is now paying.
Well, Georgia only has to pay 1.25.
Okay.
But if you look at it from Florida's standpoint, Georgia's paying you $9 million because you don't have to pay Mike White the 8, and now Georgia's paying you to take him. So I think even from Florida's standpoint, if I'm Scott Strickland and I'm being honest with myself, he loves Mike White. I know he had conversations with Mike and telling him like, hey, we are supporting you. We've shown you that we're supporting you with a contract, but like we got to start winning some of these games. You've got to start winning some of these games and we can't miss the tournament. So I'm not going to say that Georgia did Florida a favor, but it might have gotten to the point where Florida might have had to make a tough decision and might have had to fire a really good guy who, as we've already talked about, it's not like he's losing basketball games. He's winning basketball games, just not to the level that Florida basketball fans want him to win. So in Florida fans' eyes, this is a boondoggle. This is fantastic for them.
Right. And in Mike's eyes, he's obviously going from a situation where he probably would have been on the hot seat next year, given the circumstances and the expectations. Now he's coming into a fresh start at Georgia where the expectations already aren't as high, but he's got a fresh start to work with as well.
And you're leaving a situation, like I said before, that had just gotten toxic. Like I can't imagine that Mike was opening Twitter or Instagram or fan mail or emails. I can't imagine he was looking at much of what was happening, because it was few and far between, even when they beat number 2 Auburn. Few and far between, the compliments from the fan base for Mike. So leaving a high pressure job in a toxic situation and going to a school that has lower expectations, but that means you're going to get the opportunity to recruit, to get your guys in, to build your staff. And I think that's kind of what Mike maybe wasn't afforded. And I'm saying that it's 7 years in, but maybe wasn't afforded by the fan base, given he was following somebody who has their name on the court that he plays on.
Right. Yeah. And we talk about the expectations for Georgia. It's not like there's not potential to make,
Sure.
to do big things in Athens. In his quote, it's probably what you would expect from a new hire of a head coach, but he said, I believe in the limitless future of Georgia basketball, which I think says a lot. For me, looking at this, I think it's important that Georgia got a guy from Florida that understands how to work at a football school. You mentioned it earlier that the SEC has become more, has grown in its basketball dominance, but it will always be a football conference. Georgia's coming off of a national championship in football. He's going to have to be competing with that, those expectations. How have you seen, obviously Florida hasn't had nearly the football success that Georgia has had over the last couple of seasons, but how have you seen Mike handle and embrace the fact that he's a basketball coach at a football school?
I think because he was asked about it at his introductory press conference. But his response was, I think we've proved that it's not just a football school. Billy won 2 championships here. Florida's also got a bunch of, non-revenue sports, I guess you want to call it. The track just won a women's indoor yesterday, and Florida's track and field team outdoor has been great. Their track and field coaches won 10 national championships. So Florida is a football school. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when I started covering baseball at Florida, nobody was tuning in to my stories or to my coverage until they won a championship. Until they won a championship in 2017. And then now it's, if I miss a baseball game, it's where the heck were you? And I'm like, I had life. I'm doing life. So I think it will be interesting because he's used to it. And then really the attendance has gotten really bad the past 2 seasons for that, and never complains about it, never calls fans out or anything like that. I think Mike knew where his place was as basketball, and his mentality is, it won't be a football school if we do what we're supposed to do. And that might not be true. You know what I mean? Basketball is never going to supersede football at Florida or at Georgia, but you will sell out the arena if you're winning SEC championships, and you will have people traveling to Gainesville or to Tuscaloosa or to Oxford and Knoxville. If you're putting a good product on the court, he wants to be able to build that. And I think he took that kind of on his shoulders to build it at Florida. And you didn't really have to build it as much at Florida because there was a recent history. But yeah, he's not going to be one that's going to, complain and whine that, well, if we had the same funds that football have, that's not his character. He's going to take what he gets and what he's given, and he's going to do what he can with it.
Last question here, just kind of wrapping things up. Give us a couple of words to describe Mike White, and I guess your final thoughts on this move that Georgia's making.
So, as someone as a writer, you'll understand this. When Mike White came on, he brought us in all the writers that covered his team. It was an off-the-record meeting, but he showed us his film of his offense, his defense, brought us through his philosophies on offense and defense, and we can't report any of this. And what he told us was, here's our recruiting board. Here's what we want to do on offense. Here's what we want to do on defense. I'm trying to educate you guys to tell you what we're trying to do so that it helps you accurately report on our team. And if you told me that Kirby Smart had done that for the writers, or that if Billy Napier had done that for us, I can tell you he hasn't. He won the media over right away. He cares a lot about the people in the building and not just his players. He cares about the GA or the student manager that's wrapping ankles. He's a really, really good person. And I can tell you that it's not a happy day inside Florida's building right now. So everyone at Georgia will be very happy that interacts with Mike. He's great with the media. He's great with the people that he works around. And he's going to be a great recruiter. So I don't know if you're covering basketball recruiting, but he's going to get some names that'll be on the on 3 100. So it'll make that exciting too. And he's a really good guy, and I hope he gets a lot of rope and gets a fair shake in Georgia, because I'm not sure that he really got a really fair shake in Gainesville.
Nick, really appreciate it so much. Y'all been killing it over at Gators Online. Again, really appreciate you joining us for this episode of Dawg Walk Talk. But that does it for us here on Dawg Walk Talk over at DawgsHQ. Be sure to check out all of our social media handles at DawgsHQ. Follow us there. And hey, if you're not subscribed, now's a perfect time to do so. You got a new men's basketball coach. Baseball season is in full gear, and spring practice is starting this week. So no better time to check out DawgsHQ and give us a try. But for this episode of Dawg Walk Talk, I'm Palmer Toms, and we'll see you later.